And I'll quickly tell you about the secrets of the banking trade and the rules of the money game. Let's start with one thing that all economists can agree, because famously they all have their own theories and they all disagree and are constantly arguing. We've got all these schools of thought, certainly in English language economics. These are the major schools of thought from David Ricardo in the 19th century, classical economics, neoclassical economics, Alfred Marshall, Keynesian, then monetarist, new classical, neo-Victorian, post-Keynesian, Austrian, ecological economists. Now they all agree on one thing. If you lower interest rates, you get higher economic growth. And if you raise interest rates, you get slower growth. And I'm sure you've heard this before. Has anyone heard this before, this claim? Yeah? I mean, they're saying it daily. The newspapers regurgitate it daily for the last several decades. So I call this the law and the profit of equilibrium economics. Because actually, these are all the different schools of thought of equilibrium economics. I'll come to that. That's what they say. Low rates lead to higher growth. Higher rates lead to low growth. And by the way, that's why now they're saying we have to raise rates because we have to fight inflation. But already, watch out, they've already tricked you. Because they're saying, oh, this inflation is not due to monetary policy, but we're going to end it with monetary policy. Right? How's that going to work? But let's check this. Because of course this claim has been made for the last 200 and 250 years in economics and is taught at all the international universities across the globe and is reiterated daily by policymakers, central banks, and so on. So of course we can assume, and we've got a lot of scientists here in the room, that it's well established in peer-reviewed journals, and there's thousands of articles that have established this. So perhaps recently maybe they haven't checked it too much, but because it's just so well established, right? Well, actually, how many academic papers demonstrating this are there? What do you think? How many empirical studies are there that demonstrate this one claim that all the different schools of equilibrium economics agree on? What do you think? I mean, is it in the tens of thousands or only in the thousands? Or hundreds? It is zero. There is not a single paper empirically demonstrating this. So I thought, okay, well, it's one of the taboo topics, but it's so fundamental in economics. Let's just have some empirical research on this. I mean, I'm always a great defender of the idea that we should use scientific research methods also in economics. It's a radical idea, but so we did this study together with a very good econometrician, Kang-Suk Lee, who's at the Luxembourg Central Bank. Published now, the second paper has just come out this year. In the first one we had US, Japan, Germany, and the UK for half a century, and in the second one with 19 countries, high frequency. And the conclusion is, this claim that the correlation between interest rates and growth is negative. Higher rates, lower growth, lower rates, higher growth. And the causation is from rates to growth, and interest rates affect growth. So these are two claims, correlation and causation. And we found that it's not true. Both cannot be confirmed. In fact, they have been rejected empirically. These hypotheses have been falsified, rejected. You look at the scatter plot on the left, the upper one is Japanese data, interest rates, short rates, and economic growth. And in the US, long rates and economic growth. It's clearly a positive correlation. But you could say, well, that's because of timing, leads, and lags. Of course, in the study, we very carefully control for that. It's a dynamic conditional correlation analysis in a gauge model. But you can also see it by simply looking at the timing at the right side, the time series, and you find that for example, in Japan, the top right graph, the pink line is GDP growth, jumps up in 87, and interest rates only start to rise 2 years later, 2.5 years later. Then GDP peaks and starts to fall in 89, and interest rates come later. Now you think, well, that's the central bank, these are short rates, but surely the US Treasury market, the most liquid securities market in the world, is different. They're much more ahead of the curve, are they? Well, look at the graph, bottom right. And you see that, for example, in the 80s, economic growth first accelerated, and then, sometimes a year later, interest rates rose. then growth decelerated, and a year later, rates started to fall. So what we find is that while the official story is high rates lead to low growth, low rates lead to high growth, the empirical reality is high growth leads to high rates, low growth leads to low rates. So this is the opposite of what they tell you in both dimensions. Interest rates are the result of economic growth and can't be the cause, and therefore they also can't be a tool of monetary policy. That raises a number of questions, I'd say. Like, what have these economists been talking about for 250 years? It also raises the question, well, okay, what is driving economic growth? And why do central banks keep up this charade? So here we are now, today, 2022. Inflation is not due to monetary policy, but monetary policy raising rates will now end inflation. The inflation is due to the oil shock, energy prices, we're being told by the ECB, but now higher rates will solve the problem. So the interest rate thesis has been soundly rejected, and central bankers have sometimes come out admitting this. I like this quote from Dame Kate Barker, who was on the Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of England, and she admitted, I've come to wonder about my time at the Monetary Policy Committee setting interest rates. I mean, that's all they did, right? Sit around the table, and then, shall we raise rates by 0.25% today, or shall we just keep them unchanged? You know, in the hours passing, you know, and hectic life. She says, it's been a bit of a waste of time, really. Well, yeah, any statisticians could have told her that. But where does this idea come from that we seem to have accepted against the empirical evidence that interest rates are the key variable driving the economy? It comes from equilibrium, the idea of equilibrium. And where did the idea of equilibrium come from? Because you see, in equilibrium, prices are key because they move so that demand and supply is equal, which is called equilibrium. Therefore, prices are key, and the overall most important price is the price of money, the interest rate. That's where it comes from.